Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. OTAs has started. Phase 3, as the players call it. And that means that my guests and I have got to talk all about it, plus some of the other off-season happenings. Big storylines from OTAs, what we want to hear from OTAs, what we did hear from OTAs, and some other things that are on our mind. We're going to talk about it all next. All right. Welcome back to Last Second Sports, where we are giving you our take down to the last second. And it's Tuesday night, which means I got my guy, So Real. Sunil in the building. What's up, Sunil?
Living the good dream. It's that part of the year where we're off and on with our scheduling, but we'll get it together as close to when the season starts.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, speaking of when the season starts, you and I are attending a game together, brother.
Yeah, we are.
Let's talk about that one.
Yeah, man, that's exciting. I'm glad. I know we've been always talking about meeting up for a game, and it just worked out. I had bought the Rams tickets. You decided, hey, that's a game that we could come to, so it's going to be cool to kick it with you. There's a lot of guys out here. I know a lot of guys from the Bay come down for that game, so we're going to have a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm excited for it, man. I had initially intended on going to the Chiefs 49ers game. Come to find out, that's the day before the Bucks play the Ravens here on Monday Night Football. I wanted to take my son to the Bucks and Ravens game, so there was no way I could go to both. It's like, you know what? Maybe I'll go to the Rams game. And you're like, well, I just purchased tickets, so you can have the other one. I was like, all right, let's do it. So I'm excited for that one too, man.
As you can see, I had no idea because I've only bought 49ers tickets in LA and in San Francisco. Yeah. I didn't realize that NFL tickets are so cheap everywhere else.
Dude, it's absolutely insane. Tickets in LA are ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. But whatever. It's not that big of a deal. I'm excited for it, man. A lot of people have been saying you need to go watch a game in LA. And that's exactly what we're going to do. So I'm excited to do so with you. Dave already came in with a super chat. He says, what's good, Jesse? I don't know who the guest is. This was earlier. This was like 20 minutes before we started. I appreciate these shows, and it's a celebration tonight. So let's get with it and get the chat hot. Appreciate you, Dave. Appreciate you, DeLeon. All right, let's get into it. OTA storylines. We heard a little bit today. And more so, this topic was talk about what we want to hear from OTAs. So we can get into that, what you want to hear from OTAs, what you're looking forward to hearing, and then also what we did here today.
Yeah, I think what I'm most interested in, obviously there's a lot of storylines, but what I'm most interested in is seeing how that secondary looks with the new additions, right? Obviously, how Huff is going to be looking. He's not necessarily practicing yet. He's on the sideline, working out, but Jair Brown with his, having a full year. I guess this is going to be his first full year as a starter. How Renardo Green is going to fit in. Is he going to take that third cornerback position? To me, I think that's going to be imperative. We saw, I think, now that how important the secondary is, especially with, the receivers that have come into our conference, let alone, that you're going to have to face to get to the Super Bowl. So that's the biggest storyline that I'm really looking for. How sharp does that secondary look?
Yeah, I want to hear all about the rookies. I think Renardo Green certainly. You talked about Hufanga, which is interesting, but what about Malik Mustafa? How does he fill in? What does that dynamic look like with Jair Brown? It was nice hearing from Jair Brown today. He seemed like a savvy vet. He talked about how much easier it was coming into this offseason than last offseason, which is understandable. He was a rookie last year. Obviously, we want to hear about Ricky Pearsall, and we heard some good things about him today, so that was awesome. And then the other thing is Brandon Ayuk. Man, what's going on there? There was a question or a thought like maybe he would show up. It's voluntary, so obviously he didn't. Mandatories are not until early June, so we'll see if he shows up there. But you want to know what came up today that really kind of threw me for a loop was Jawan Jennings. Now, there's been a lot of conversation. I remember saying a couple months back, or like a month and a half back, like, hey, he hasn't signed his tender. And then people in the chat were like, yes, he did. He's got the Instagram out there. And so we just kind of all took it for what it was. He did have the Instagram post. He said something like year 4 loading, showed the tender offer. Everybody just assumed that he has signed. Well, it comes out today that he hasn't signed that
Right.
tender. And that was a little bit of a surprise for me. So now that's a new storyline that I'm looking for. Is he going to sign his tender? Is he looking for a long-term deal? What does that look like? So that's an added storyline. And then I'll give you one more storyline that I didn't realize either. But Jake Brendel was not out there. They asked if he was injured. And not only did Shanahan say he was injured, but he had said that he had knee arthritis. Now, I'm hoping he misspoke and he meant tendonitis, which is very different than arthritis. But if it is, in fact, arthritis, what are we talking about here? I mean, this is supposed to be the starting center. I know that maybe long term he's not going to be the guy, but I think we're all counting on him being the guy for at least this year. So if he has arthritis in his knee, that turns out to be a big deal. That means he's likely going to be in and out of the lineup for a big chunk of the year. So we'll see, man. I think there's a lot of little
Yeah.
things that kind of came out today that we weren't necessarily privy to or aware of.
Yeah, and I mean, also we don't want to over the play. You know, all of this stuff is fluid. There's still some time, but it is something to keep your eye on. Obviously, it's exciting because we're getting football news, and you know, the main goal I think going through OTAs and through this offseason is we want to make sure that we keep the core healthy. That's the biggest thing, right? You don't want to have any huge injuries in the offseason for sure. But you know, to put some positive stuff on there, look, Nick Bosa was there. He's usually
Mhm.
not there, so that I think is a good sign. Debo was there. He's also somebody who's
And
not
in
usually
shape.
there and in shape, right? Obviously, Purdy was there. So, you know, I think that it's easy to kind of point to maybe some of the, you know, negative storylines that might be out there, but it does seem like, you know, the team is motivated. You know, some of the big leaders are there. I think Debo and Bosa being there, I think is a big deal. Those are two guys that tend to do their own thing in the offseason, but them both being there, I think is a good sign as far as for these young guys. And if you remember last year, Brandon Ayuk ended up being that guy, especially with, you know, the younger receivers and things like that. He was able to become, you know, more of a vocal leader, and we saw how that played out as far as him being taking on more responsibility on the field, and it led to, you know, his best season of his career. I think this could be a good sign for both Bosa and Debo, who I think probably underperformed based off of what their expectations were, especially both of them coming off a big, you know, contract extension and whatnot. So, you know, I think that there's things to be optimistic about. There's some things that are, you know, oh my, like, you know, raises some eyebrows as well, but it's only day 2. So, no.
Yeah, no, I mean, I didn't look at it as like a negative or a positive, just some surprising things. Like Ayuk not being there isn't surprising, right? Or even just some of the other veterans not being there. That's really not actually a surprise to me. I mean, this is voluntary. And there's a lot, you can go team by team. There's a lot of good players that aren't showing up to these things,
Mhm.
which is fine. It was just more, wow, I didn't realize that Jennings hadn't signed that tender because
Yeah.
there was some confusion there. And then I had no idea about Brendel's knee. So that's just something to pay attention to. But I would say the positive of a Jennings and an Ayuk not being there is the 2 rookie receivers being able to get some snaps and extra play. That helps their development as well. So you get not
Well,
only
Cowing
Pearsall.
wasn't there.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, that's a good call. Yeah. All right. So Pearsall was there and Cowing
Yeah.
isn't. Yeah. So there you go.
Hey, but maybe that's a good sign for the Owen son. Maybe he gets
Yeah.
a chance to
Yeah.
really show out because
Yeah.
this. So you know how you look at I don't know. I've been doing a lot of fantasy drafts and stuff like that, and so
Yeah.
later on in the drafts, obviously he's an undrafted rookie, but you see T.O. in San Francisco, and it's pretty cool to see that because, you know, obviously it reminiscent of, you know, Pops Terrell Owens on the team, but yeah, I mean, I think that the more reps that some of these younger guys get, not only at the receiver, but You know, um, Christian McCaffrey not being there means Garindo will get some more looks, and we get to
Yeah.
see what that's about, you know. And Renata Green getting some looks, the same Mustafa getting some looks because Huff isn't fully there. You know, get to see you know what these younger linebackers or the linebackers that we brought in what they could do now because you know Greenlaw isn't around. So I think it's going to be interesting just to get a glimpse of what the potential is. Does seem like most of the defensive line are there, other than like a few guys. So good to see Bosa and Floyd there at the same time. Hopefully, you know they could push each other to get the best out of each other this season.
Well, Drake Jackson, another guy who was not there, who's hurt as
Injured,
well. So that's yeah,
yeah.
that's something worth noting. So I don't know. There's some interesting, and it's not necessarily like some of the big name guys, right, that are popping up on these lists, but it is starting to shed some light and like, man, some of these guys might be on the bubble. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Of making this team or certainly playing time. So you got to start paying attention. Like, what does it look like? Why is this guy not there? Why is this guy not healthy?
right.
You know, who's injured? So there's just a lot of little storylines for the first time they're getting together. Again, it's still May. It's not even training camp or even mandatories, but just some things of note. But it was nice seeing guys like Kittle there as well, even though he wasn't, on the field. He was still there supporting the
With the
team.
new
So
haircut.
yeah, yeah, he was. Catching Bud Lights from Brock Purdy is always a good thing too. So there you go. All right, let's talk about first team All Pros. This team has a lot of them, but maybe, just maybe, there might be a player or two on this team that could be a first team All Pro for the first time. We've seen, even Ayuk was a second team All Pro last year. Um, you had
Mooney Ward.
You had Mooney Ward was a second team All Pro. Dre Greenlaw, I swear, has been snubbed forever on All Pro lists. You've had a lot of first team All Pros. We've talked about them on offense, Fred Warner on defense, Bosa, what have you. So, a guy or two that you think might be a first team All Pro this season on the 49ers.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be between three guys. You know, and I apologize in advance if I take some of your guys, but for me, it's Ayuk, it's Mooney Ward, and it's Deommodore Lenoir. I think those are the three guys that are, I think, at the caliber of All Pro and have, the potential to be, the top two in their class or whatever the rankings are for. I forget how many corners get picked and how many receivers get picked, but Brandon Ayuk was on the precipice to get to first team this last season. I expect him to get paid, and I expect him to be a larger part of the offense to get more opportunities. You think based off of how the 49ers drafted that they are looking to throw the ball more. So I think Ayuk is definitely wide receiver one at this point. And then you look at Mooney Ward, some of the interviews he's had this offseason, Jesse, he's still focused. I think that being an All Pro is important to him. He likes the competition, and the same goes for Deommodore Lenoir. I mean, he's the most underrated player on this team by the numbers and based off of, how he performs and where he was drafted and what he gets paid. And I think that he could have a breakout year, especially in a year where potentially it's if they don't give him an extension this year, it's a prove it year, right, for him to get his big contract next season. So we always know that usually, and that I guess that's the same for Mooney Ward too. Both of those guys are playing in prove it years as far as looking for next season what their contracts are going to be.
Yeah, most certainly. I mean, I think Mooney, for a guy who is fighting for that next contract, Deommodore Lenoir is another guy who looks like he is. And then obviously we know that Ayuk is trying to get paid this offseason and maybe Demo as well. But yeah, I think the one guy that I really had in mind was Mooney. I think, Mooney being 28, he's in his athletic prime. He's fighting for one final big time deal, whether that's with San Francisco or another team. So I think Mooney Ward's probably the guy that I have my sights set on. And if they can get a player in the secondary to be a first team All Pro, that says a lot about this team and probably where it's headed, because that means the defense is probably lights out. We expect that the defensive line is going to be good as always. You've got 3 big time players there. If Greenlaw can come back at some point this season, you've got 2 big time players at linebacker. And now all of a sudden you get an all pro player coming out of the secondary. That makes things really, really interesting. And that means that the defense has done its job. So I'm rooting for somebody to come out of the secondary for sure. And I think Demo certainly can be that guy. He's a number 1 corner. I think he's borderline top 10. And when he's at his best, I think he creeps into that top 10. But, every year corners kind of go up and down as far as what they do and what they don't do. So I think this is a year where he can really pop off, try to get paid and enter that all pro status. I would love to see it.
Yeah, especially with a guy like Marvin Harrison Jr. Joining the division. There's going to be a lot of eyes on him. Obviously Puka. There's a lot of eyes on him. All the teams that we play in this division have big predominant wide receivers. So that gives you a good chance to constantly be featured. We know that the 49ers are going to be on national television quite a bit, which also bodes well for, people trying to make that all pro team, because there is a little bit of, favoritism and what's it called? Like the social media portion of it as well. So I think it points in the direction, we know that the 49ers always have multiple guys that end up, being on the all pro team. And it'd be nice to see some of these guys get their due, because they are playing at that level. It's just about them being acknowledged.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. Hold on. Computer froze up on me. I can't grab these supers. Or not these super, but these chats. Mark says, maybe you should listen to Lombardi sometimes. He knew a long time ago that he didn't sign it. Yeah, that was kind of my thought too. I mean, I thought that he hadn't signed it, but then, everybody in the chat's like, no, he did. And then they pulled up the Instagram. I was like, oh, maybe he did. Maybe I missed it. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure he had it right. I personally can't listen to him, but if you want to bring information over here, if you get something good and you want to pull it over here, he's a smart guy. He's just not my cup of tea. But yeah, that's good that he was on it the whole time. That's great. Let's see here. All right, let's talk about some players. See, I'm going to cheat on this one. I'm already going to let you know I'm going to cheat on this one. You know how I always find loopholes in these topics that we do? So this one is impact injuries. These are guys coming off of injuries that you think can have a major impact this year or will have a major impact. And there's some guys, right? The obvious guys. You've got Talanoa Hufanga. You've got Greenlaw, which, Greenlaw is probably going to start the year on some sort of pup or something like that. But who's a player or two coming off of injury that you think can have a big time impact or will have a big time impact and kind of get back to his normal ways? And I'll tell you, the player that I'm going to say right now is a player that was injured last year, but wasn't necessarily missing time towards the tail end of the year.
Oh my gosh, Jesse.
Let's see.
Anyways,
no, but he was hurt. He was hurt. He was hurt all year.
I mean, everybody was hurt. But anyways, for me, I think I'm going to go with Hufanga. And the reason why I'm going to go with Hufanga is not only is he, he was chomping at the bit in the sense that, he wanted to be out there. He was coming off an all-pro year. But now all of a sudden it switches to where now he's playing he's going to make the team. But I'm saying, if he's going to be one of the long-term players here for the 49ers, within basically a blink of an eye, now you're playing for your future in the NFL, right? So him coming back, showing he could stay healthy for the season, getting back to that all-pro level is going to be dependent on how much he's going to get paid next season, right? So to me, I think Hufanga is going to be able to get a lot of, play in this, when he gets healthy, because obviously we need, a safety. But then on top of that, I think he's going to be extremely motivated because a lot's on the line for him personally, and what his future in the NFL is as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good one. This is a good one too. Kalia Davis, man, he's a guy that I've been excited about for the last 2 off seasons, and he just hasn't been able to like show up. And I remember, what was it, like day 1 of training camp that I showed up last year? He was sitting out, and I was super disappointed because he was a guy that I wanted to see kind of break out last year. I feel like he has like the perfect physical frame to really help out on the interior defensive line here, but he's just been super hurt. So maybe he can be that guy. Drake Jackson, that would be fantastic, brother. I really wish that he was going to break out, but he's hurt now. So I don't know. The guy that I actually wanted to say, and yes, it's a bit of a loophole, but at the same time, this player was injured a lot last year, did miss time for multiple different injuries. And I just felt like regressed last year because of those injuries. And I think as a player that can have a big time impact on this team, that was really good just 2 years ago, and like I said, did take a step back, and that was Aaron Banks. Aaron Banks is a guy who's fighting for a contract this season. Again, he didn't miss a lot of time or a lot of games because of these injuries, but he did miss some time because of multiple injuries. And those injuries obviously lingered all year long. He had the toe, he had the pec, the bicep. There was just a lot of things there that were hampering him. I'm looking forward to him being healthy this year and really helping out that offensive line. And we'll see what happens along the right side, whether it's Feliciano, Pooney, Burford, who ends up starting from center over. Maybe they make some changes there. But I think this offensive line can improve if Aaron Banks can get back to or even better than what he was 2 years ago. Because I do think that he did regress last year. And I think a big reason why was because of those injuries.
Sure. And I mean, not only would that be amazing, not only for the player, but having that left side be a no-brainer in the sense you don't have to worry about that left side with Trent and Aaron Banks. Like, that would make life a lot easier for the running game, for the rest of the offensive line as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I know it wasn't a super. I think I corrected myself. Maybe not. Maybe not. But this is the super. Dave says, Jesse, you're my cup of tea. I appreciate you, Dave. You're also my cup of tea. Very nice of you. All right. Let's talk about this one. It's this whole thing with Brock Purdy this offseason has been so interesting to me. Just the conversation, all the different rankings of quarterbacks. I saw another one come out today from PFF. They had him ranked 13. Seen him as low as 16. I've seen him as high as 2. There's a lot of conversation around Brock Purdy. But this is Brock Purdy's first full offseason. Speaking of Brock Purdy, he was there at OTAs today. It was nice to hear from him. He seemed to be in high spirits, sharp, wants Brandon Ayuk to get that deal done as well. Looking forward to that. But really, all the chatter around Brock Purdy should be saved for next offseason because that's when the real conversation is going to be had. Yet, Brock Purdy is the quarterback of the San Francisco 49ers. He's always going to be in the news. But one thing that we haven't necessarily discussed is what are the expectations for Brock Purdy? And Brock Purdy does have some expectations that are going to be important this year, that he hits some of those measures if this team is ultimately going to get over that hump and win a Lombardi trophy for the first time in 30 freaking years. So that being said, what are some of your expectations for Brock Purdy this season?
Yeah, and I think it's funny because we talk about Brock Purdy like he's a seasoned vet. The type of criticism he gets. I think he's criticized more than some of the guys that have been drafted in years before him that were not higher draft picks, but they're not criticized nearly as much and probably haven't had the same level of success that Purdy has had in just his 2 years of playing in the league. But why my expectations are for him to even take another step forward, Jesse, is this is going to be his first healthy offseason. He hasn't had one as the starter. Last season, he was dealing with the injury. The year before that, he was fighting for a spot on the team. So he's the guy. He's healthy. He's going to be playing with all familiar faces on that offense. There's not really any new impactful guys that are coming in. And this is the third year, in this offense. And what I hope to see, and what I believe we'll be able to see, is that trust between him and Kyle Shanahan will begin to grow, where he allows Brock Purdy to be Brock Purdy a little bit more than we've been able to see him with previous quarterbacks. And what I mean by that is being able to audible on the line, being able to do some things off script, because at this point, Kyle Shanahan has been able to instill how he sees the game, and that's going to coincide with how Purdy plays the game. So to me, I expect, we've talked about this, I feel like, for the past 2 years, where the offense is going to be more prevalent than the defense. And I think this is the year that we see that, because, Purdy is playing for a contract. I think the 49ers are looking at it and being like, we got to see what we really have in this guy. Is he the guy that we're going to, pin our franchise hopes on and give him that big money contract as a quarterback? And I think the way that you do that, Jesse, is you give him a little bit more free reign to see, can he get you over that hump? Can he be that difference maker? And I believe he can. I think a lot of people look at what he can't do, and, he's not that prototypical, quarterback as far as size and arm strength. But I think he's elite in a lot of key factors. And I think that especially in this system, he's damn near perfect for this system as far as what his strengths are and what he's surrounded by. So to me, I expect the next leap, and him to really prove that he can be the guy here for the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, well, you said something interesting, and I think this is a good conversation to kind of throw in the middle of this as well. Is, you said that he's proven a lot, but there are other players who maybe were drafted higher, have better physical traits, that are given credit for things they haven't necessarily done in this league. When you say that, who's a player or two that comes to mind?
Trevor
'Cause I have
Lawrence.
one. Thank you. Me too. Me too. I agree with you with Trevor Lawrence. It's interesting because Trevor Lawrence if you watch his film last year, it was a lot better than the numbers suggest. I will say that. But there's
And he was
still
injured.
something, and he was, but there's still something to be desired with Trevor Lawrence. And maybe we'll see it this year, but he also might get paid before this year even starts. And I think that if I'm Jacksonville, I'm making him play out this year. I want to see how this year goes before I even think about extending him. And truth be told, I might want to see how next year plays out, and then, play the whole franchise tag game with him. I know that that's like not what you want to do with a franchise quarterback or your perceived franchise quarterback, but I got to see more from Trevor Lawrence. And certainly, yes, he's got all the physical traits, and he was the first pick overall, and he deserved to be all those things, or to be the first pick overall in that draft. But that being said, he's been a little too up and down for me. I got to see it for at least one more year before I'm fully in on Trevor Lawrence. But yeah, he's the guy that comes to mind as well. I mean, all the physical traits, first pick overall. And I think people automatically rank him above Purdy. And I would say that shouldn't be the case right now. He's like the one guy that I think of when you say things like that.
Yeah. And I mean, there's been a ton, going back in years, that are guys that have fizzled out. I mean, Sam Darnold was one of those guys, as well, where you look at all the guys that were drafted in that same draft that Trevor Lawrence was drafted in, Fields, Mac Jones, Trey Lance, all of those guys are no longer, with teams that drafted them, and are fighting for, even to be a starter in this league. And you have Purdy out here that all he's done is just win as a starter with the 49ers. Took him to an NFC championship game, potentially could have taken him to the Super Bowl that first year if there wasn't that injury. And then when he was healthy, they did make it to the Super Bowl. So to me, I just think that, there's a narrative where it's like people are kind of rooting. For as many people that I think are rooting for him to succeed, Jesse, there's a large portion of the NFL elites that don't want him to succeed because it makes them look bad as far as, not being in on him earlier, I guess. But I agree with you, man. He's not somebody who I'm like, oh, okay, he's for sure the guy. I think he's going to be the guy just because the 49ers haven't, what else are they going to do? Kirk Cousins potentially being available might throw a wrench, I think, in some of those things. But yeah, I think this year I expect him to get more opportunity, and I expect him to show that he's either the guy. And if I'm wrong, then, obviously the 49ers have a big decision to make.
Yeah, absolutely. I also find it interesting with Purdy because, like, for those that are like, oh man, I just need to see it for one more year. I don't think that anything's going to change this year with this team around him. I think we know what it's going to look like. It's going to look similar to what it was last year. But I think that there are areas where he can improve. Like what I want to see from him is just find one thing and have a pretty sizable improvement there. So whether that's, using his legs more, we know that he can get mobile, but it's choosing when to be mobile. And I feel like there's certainly opportunity for him to run a little bit more than what he has in the past. And we've seen that when he does choose to run, it's pretty deadly. It's hard to stop. So I would like to either see that incorporated, the ball placement, that improve quite a bit, or his arm strength, which certainly can be worked on. I mean, your arm can get better, or if he gets in these inclement weather games, let's see the improvement there as well, where he doesn't seem to turn into a complete pumpkin if it gets a little bit wet outside. So I'm not saying he needs to improve in all these areas this season, but if he can take one of those areas and take that major step forward in that area, then I think you could see a much better player regardless of what the statistics say. I don't know what it'll look like statistically, but if he can improve in one of those areas, then you're looking at a much better player. And then it's like, okay, the next offseason, you can take one more thing and improve on that. And if you do that for 4 or 5 seasons, then all of a sudden, you're a complete quarterback by the time you're 27, 28. You've got all the things in your tool belt, and now you're just rolling and hopefully winning championships. So that's what I would like to see from Brock Purdy, is just one of those things. You got 4 or 5 things you can improve on that can all be improved on, that aren't necessarily physical limitations. And if he can improve on just one of those this offseason and do it in a drastic way, you're looking at a much better player.
Absolutely. And you're looking at a very dangerous team as well, right? So I think, as 49er fans, we're hoping for the same thing, because if he takes a leap forward, the team's only going to look better as well.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Cryptic says more command of the offense, audibles, off script throws, want him to rely on his best weapons more. In the Super Bowl, I felt he was looking for Jennings way more than BA. Yeah, the audibles thing, though, I think is more up to Shanahan than it is Purdy. I think Purdy's certainly smart enough to handle it and has enough command to handle it. But Shanahan's not really a guy that's going to let you audible at the line. He's the type of guy that is going to give you 2 plays, and you're going to be able to flip those plays or choose a run or choose the pass based off what you're seeing. But they're pre-designed, predetermined plays that he's given you. It's not like you just have the full playbook at your disposal and you're like, listen, you want this play. Instead of checking out of a play and going to another play you've given me, I want to go to this completely different play in the playbook. He doesn't really have autonomy to do that. So as much as we would love for him to do that, that's something that Kyle Shanahan has to be willing to allow him to do as well.
Yeah, but I do like one thing Cryptic says, like with some of these better quarterbacks, especially in the playoffs, you see them kind of, as much as you want to say, hey, they take what the game gives them, when push comes to shove, they hone in on their guy and they force feed him the ball, right? With Patrick Mahomes, you saw him do that. Unfortunately, in the Super Bowl, when Dre Greenlaw went down, all of a sudden the ball started getting to Travis Kelce a lot more. You saw that with Tom Brady back, whether it was Wes Welker, whether it was Edelman. They would just force feed the ball to these guys over and over and over again. And I think that Ayuk and Purdy had that connection and Ayuk is that player, it would be nice to see some of these games where it's just like, no matter what, if Ayuk even has a step on somebody, I'm throwing the ball to him and let's, see what Ayuk can do with all of his talent and ability.
Yeah, absolutely. Zach says last time Sunil was on, Kendrick had just dropped Euphoria, and Jesse was unsure if there was any real heat. 3 weeks later, what are your thoughts? No, I mean, I think really kind of what happened was exactly what kind of proved my point, which was Euphoria, and what had been dropped to that point was like a bunch of like warning shots, warning shots, warning shots. And then what ended up ensuing was a lot of really good back and forth. And Kendrick coming out with those final 2 songs after Euphoria kind of proved what I was saying, which was, yeah, Euphoria was all right, but he wasn't going in. Those last 2 songs he went in and definitely let him have it. So Euphoria was all right still. Nothing changed there. But as far as the beef actually growing and getting better, yes, it certainly improved from that point on. It did.
I still think Euphoria is the best track out of all of the ones that came out. But
Really?
yeah. I mean, when you break it down and when you hear what he did on that track, I think it's one of the best diss tracks I've heard, in history. I know that you have a different kind of feel for what you want songs and rap songs and stuff to be, but for me, Euphoria was number 1. Family Matters was number 2 as far as the best diss tracks, and then it was just like Kendrick song after that. But I mean, it was great. It's kind of sad that it's over, but yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed the whole moment that we were able to have for those few weeks.
It was a lot of fun, especially that final weekend where it went crazy.
Yeah.
It went absolutely crazy. Is there, early on you were talking about, you had mentioned this and we both talked about Trevor Lawrence. Who's another player that fits that, like, hey, they were a high draft pick, or just maybe not even a high draft pick, but players that are quarterbacks that maybe get too much love, or you can go the other way, quarterbacks that don't get enough love when it comes to talking about the top 10 quarterbacks other than Brock Purdy?
Well, I mean, I think when I want to be more specific as far as, right, it's very early on, right? People are already saying Brock Purdy cannot be the quarterback to win a Super Bowl, right? In the second year, to put that on a guy that's done nothing but get your team as far as he legitimately could.
People are saying he can't win a Super Bowl?
Yeah.
No.
You have guys in the media saying that it's impossible. The 49ers will never win a Super Bowl with Brock Purdy there. So when I'm looking at QBs that aren't getting that same kind of like thought process about them, which potentially haven't proven that. I mean, there's 2 in the NFC that I could think of right off the bat, and that's teams that are surrounded with just as much talent as the 49ers that haven't done it, and that's Jalen Hurts with Philadelphia, and that's Dak Prescott with the Cowboys. Those 2 quarterbacks, I don't think anybody looks at them and is like, their limitations will mean that they can never win a Super Bowl with the teams like those. You can't win a Super Bowl with these guys as your quarterback, and that's stuff that you hear about Brock Purdy. I just think it's kind of unfair for how much he's been able to do with the team, but more importantly, how young he is. Right? You expect that he's going to get better. So that's where I say, I'm not saying that like he's necessarily going to be the franchise quarterback here. I just think it's hard to say that he isn't going to be after just, 1.5 seasons of him playing in the system.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you have to be willing to make predictions, but I think anybody who's speaking in absolutes after a season and a half, it's pretty wild. Like, whether you think like, oh yeah, he's elite or he's going to be elite, like that can be a prediction, but to like assume that he's there or that's a lock, I think that's premature. And I think anybody saying that he can't get there, without a doubt, it's different than predicting he won't get there, but saying that he just can't, I think that's also premature. It's just one of those things that you have to let it play out. You've seen players pop up and have really good years and then kind of fade into the background. You've seen players have multiple good years and then, or bad years and then get really good. And, there's just so much that can go into it. It's such a year to year, week to week league. I'm just looking forward to seeing what he does. And while he's still cheap, I will say this: the fact that they made it to an NFC championship with him and a Super Bowl with him, they absolutely can win a Super Bowl with him while he's on this contract. And they have the opportunity to do that this year. Now, I don't think it's going to be easy. I still think they blew their best chance last year to do so. But that doesn't mean that it can't get done this year. It just means that the road is going to be harder to hoe.
Yeah, I mean, anybody that thinks it's going to be easier this year than last year is being naive, but that doesn't mean that they can't do it this year. That's the hope.
Yeah, for sure. Who said that he's elite? Somebody in the chat say he was elite?
I mean, I think most people think that he's on the trajectory to be elite.
Oh, for
But he
sure.
has
Yeah,
to
he's
do it for
on
multiple
that
years.
trajectory.
And we just mentioned a guy, Jalen Hurts, had the 1 year that everybody was high on him, just like they're high on Stroud, and then obviously he hasn't been able to live up to those. Hasn't had a year like that since, potentially due to injury. We don't know, but guys can be one-hit wonders as well. So Stroud, I think all of us look at him, his demeanor, how he was successful, and you think that could be replicated, but he still has to prove it.
Yeah, most certainly. I mean, you don't become elite after one really good season. I think that you become elite after multiple good seasons. You have to prove it for a while. And he certainly is on the path, right? I mean, you're talking about a player. If you're projecting, you're talking about a player who was elite in high school, was elite in college, should have been the first overall pick. I mean, that much was very clear to me as soon as I watched him play. But he wasn't, and he was still the second pick. And then he was elite in year one in Houston. So, like, everything up to this point tells you, yeah, he's definitely trending there. But you don't just get crowned and are given that. I mean, I think Trevor Lawrence is a really good example. Like, let's say Trevor Lawrence had come out his first year and been really elite, and then the second year had a dud. We would still be having questions about Trevor Lawrence. So, yeah, if he has a sophomore slump and the league figures him out a little bit, then we're going to need to see that third year and then try to figure it out from there. But yes, he's certainly trending towards elite. But to say that he is elite and that's a lock, it's too early for that. It just is. All right. I asked this question to Coach, and I want to get your opinion on it. So, and I asked it on Twitter as well. I didn't go check the final results, but if I said the 49ers record was either 13-4 or 9-8 this year, what would you say is the more likely thing to happen? And then before you answer that, just looking at it, what is your guess on their record this year? And then you can kind of get into answering the question as well.
Yeah, I saw the predictions you put out. I was right there with you. I think 12-5 is where I see the 49ers ending the season. And so I think it's much more likely. And barring injury, obviously, right? You get an injury to Purdy or to Trent or whatever, then obviously everything changes. But barring injury, I think 9-8 would be, I would be shocked if a healthy 49ers team goes 9-8. I would put all of my money on that they are more likely to get to 13-4 than they are at 9-8. Because, even though I think a lot of people are excited about Detroit, thinking that they're going to take another step. Obviously, Green Bay is there. And I think people always are excited about.
Did I say 13-4? I'm at 14-3. Maybe I said that wrong. 14-3 or 9-8. Sorry. Did I say 13-4?
Yeah.
14-3. Sorry. That's my bad. 14-3. 14-3 or 9-8. That's the question. My bad. It's not 13-4.
I think that, I would still say 14-3. Okay. I think that a lot of people are excited about these new teams, but the one thing about new teams that are talented and on the rise, they still have to learn how to win. And we saw Detroit basically give away the game to the 49ers. We saw Jordan Love make, a decision you just can't make, in a playoff game to close that out. I think that there's that aspect that people just kind of take for granted. And this 49ers are still the team to beat in the NFC. I do think that this is the last year that they're probably the team to beat in the NFC. I think after this, they're just going to not be able to keep the same core around, and they're going to lose some key pieces. But as far as this year, as long as they're healthy, I think more teams are like, we got to figure out a way to beat this team, versus I think the 49ers still have multiple ways to beat, every team in the conference.
Interesting. So obviously, if I look at 14-3 from my record prediction at 12-5, I mean, we're 2 games away. 9-8 would be a 3-game backslide from a 12-5 record. So just on paper, math wise, 14-3 is closer than the 9-8 record. I understand that. I actually think that it would be more likely that they would finish 9-8 over 14-3, though. And the main reason for that is injuries. Like, they were just so blessed last year with lack of injuries. I mean, we're talking about a couple guys that are coming off of injury. I understand that. But when you look at the course of the season, that was the healthiest season that this team has had in many, many years, well before Shanahan was here. So, like, this injury thing has been going on for a long time, and it's only gotten worse, I would say, under Shanahan. And now, this last year, however, they were the healthiest they'd been in a long time, by not even a little bit, by a wide margin, like 75, 80% healthier than they had been in about 20 seasons. It was absolutely insane. So,
But
just
wouldn't you,
yeah, go ahead.
And I'm sorry to cut you off, but it's based off of what you're saying. I think that sometimes we have a hard time letting go of what happened earlier in this regime, because they made a very, I think, distinct difference. And what's great about doing the show with you, Jesse, is like, we've talked about a lot of this stuff for the past 2 years, right? And it's going to be exciting to keep going with you. But like, I remember us talking about how the 49ers were drafting maybe 2 years ago, potentially maybe even 3, but like, they started looking at injury history and who they started to draft and who they were bringing onto the team. Earlier in the regime, they were going for like high ceiling guys, but had a lot of injury history. And then all of a sudden they started changing, and even the free agents that they brought in, the guys that they were drafting, they all had pretty much a clean bill of health. And I think that has correlated into them being a more healthy team, because their core players aren't oft injured guys, right? And I think that that's a shift that has been being made, that we're starting to see the fruits of that. And I think the team should get a little bit of credit for that, versus it just being a fluke and it's just luck. Because I do think that this is these are the changes that they've made, because it was such a big issue for them earlier in the regime, because of it wasn't a fluke that it was happening. They were bringing on guys that had a lot of injuries in their past, that were guys that, had lingering knee stuff, back issues, so on and so forth. And that's why there was always injuries throughout the season. I think we saw less of that these last 2 years, because they're starting to bring on more healthy guys. So I think that it's more likely that they stay healthier than just accept that that it's a fluke.
Yeah, but even guys like Kittle, who misses games every year, stayed healthy. Kinlaw, who had been an injury merchant, stayed healthy. You know what I mean? Like, they had some luck on their side from guys that even have had some injury history. I think football is just one of those sports, man, where it's like a train wreck every single play. I don't care what your history is before. Now, obviously, if you just like could never stay healthy, then it's likely that you're just never going to stay healthy. But even if you've been healthy up to that point, it's like, there's so many car crashes that happen through the course of a game that even if you're a healthy guy, you can get hurt. And we saw it across, it's not just a 49er thing. I mean, we saw it across, the Chargers are a team that stays everybody on injured reserve. There's just some teams that are plagued with it. And really, you're starting to see even quarterbacks, even though the rules are set to protect them, they're getting injured at an astronomical rate now. So it's like, there is a lot of luck that goes into it, and luck can be on your side or it may not be. And I just think maybe it won't go as crazy as what it was because of what you're talking about. But I think being one of the healthier teams in the league on top of setting health records for themselves over the course of the last 20 years, chances are they're going to regress a little bit. And they're already starting the season off without a key player, most likely in Dre Greenlaw. That's already one step, one foot into the grave, so to speak, when it comes to injuries. You know, Trent Williams is going to miss 2-3 games. He always does. Chances are Debo does. Kittle didn't miss last year, but he does every other. You know what I mean? So there's going to most likely be some injuries that happen that are going to take these guys out. So I just think that betting on a team to remain as healthy as they were last year, and then against an NFC that has improved, I would say, regardless of whether they've proven it or not, on paper, these teams certainly have improved over last year. To take that leap to 14-3, I just think is less realistic than finishing 9-8. I think the most realistic thing is what we're talking about, which is 11, 12 wins. That's pretty much what we're predicting. But if I had to go to one extreme or the other, I would say, listen, health probably isn't on their side. Teams have gotten better. I think the division's gotten better. I could see a scenario more likely where they finish 9-8 versus 14-3. If I had to say for sure one of those records was going to happen, I would bet on 9-8.
Well, of course you would, Jesse. You're Mr. Pessimist on this show. And of course I'd go 14-3. I'm Mr. Optimist. So we're playing our roles.
they've got 4 teams that they're playing coming off of bye weeks. Have you not heard this, Sunil? I'm just kidding.
I have. Might as well just pack up the season. Pack up the season. They shouldn't even play it.
Yeah.
Might as well just redshirt everybody. There's no need to play the games.
Yeah, exactly. Dave says, look at Greenlaw, crazy fluke. Yeah, I mean,
the worst time.
You talk about the worst time ever, dude. Evening Christmas, man. The Chiefs, yeah, that was another team, though. I mean, going into that Super Bowl, they lost during that playoff run to get to the Super Bowl. They lost their starting defensive tackle. They lost a starting pass rusher and a Minahu, and they lost a starting left guard just to get to the Super Bowl. Like, that was the war of attrition. That was the price they paid just to get through the AFC. And then they played us with all those guys down and still were able to overcome it. So I don't know. I guess really good teams overcome it. Okay, so let me ask you this then. We can't predict injury, but I'm saying, hey, 9-8 is more likely because of the injury possibility. Well, none of that really matters if this team has built more depth. So do you think this team has more depth than it did last year? Because that certainly would help alleviate some of those injuries that could possibly happen.
I think the player that, which is ridiculous, but if Trent goes down, that's the one I'm worried about. I think that they have enough depth at all the other positions that they could still, be. I think with Trent there, they're clear number one in the NFC for me. Trent going down now, I think that there's a debate with who's going to be that number one team. And even more than CMC, I think, we've seen Elijah Mitchell have, a lot of success there. We'll see what Garindo does, but they have like some young legs there that could still have some success. I think receiver, they're very deep at. Defensive line, we've seen them. I mean, obviously if Bosa goes down, that's going to be a big issue, but I still think they have some guys there that could potentially still have some success. But the big one is Trent. I don't think they have a left tackle that is going to be able to make up the difference that Trent's able to do, where you can just not worry about Trent. You just know you can put him on an island and he's going to be okay. That's the big one. Outside of that, I do think they have a lot of depth. I think that their secondary is the deepest that we've ever seen. The receivers are the deepest they've ever seen. I think that linebacker, even with Dre Greenlaw out there, they still have a lot of talent there. Offensive line outside of left tackle, I think that everybody I don't think there's a huge drop off from the starters to who's next in line. So yeah, I think that there is a lot of depth everywhere outside of the left tackle.
Yeah, I mean, I think they've built some depth I don't know that they've necessarily improved from a starter aspect on either of the trenches, but I think depth wise, they probably have. I think even in the wide receiver room, if Debo goes down, whether Pearsall steps up or Cowing, I think that maybe you have an opportunity that drop off isn't as big. The secondary certainly has a lot more depth than it's had in a long, long time. So I think depth wise, that is where this team can stay afloat if they do have some of these injuries. Gabe brings up a point. He says, I think 9-8 would actually benefit them. They can develop some grit and not be such a finesse team. But I think in your scenario, Gabe, you're saying that this team also makes the playoffs. Like that would have them battle tested and playoff ready. 9-8, I don't know that you're going to make it, right? So you got to probably win 10 games if you want to make the playoffs. That's just to almost guarantee your spot at 9-8. You really got to
You're on
hope
the
for a lot
bubble.
to go your way to make it. Yeah, you're definitely on
There's a
bubbles.
lot of
So
tiebreakers and all that kind of stuff that are gonna.
yeah, yep, absolutely. All right, y'all. Listen, appreciate you for tapping in with us on this Tuesday evening. I'll be back tomorrow with Grant and then Thursday with Marco. Hope you all stay blessed. Have a good evening and enjoy what is left of the NBA playoffs or whatever it is that you're going to do. Much love. Peace.